Bonjour, je m'appelle Todd Baginski. Hi, I'm Todd Baginski. I'm a Microsoft MVP and partner and CTO at Canvas. I thought it'd be fitting today to start out with a different language in the video because today's video is how to create PowerApps that target multilingual users. Let's get started. I've had a lot of folks reaching out to me recently asking me if it's possible to make a PowerApp multilingual. And I knew that it was, and I'd done it before. And one place I wanted to point out is this blog post here, where I first learned how to do this on the PowerApps team blog. This is a really helpful post, and it has a process in it that is pretty much the same process that I'm doing, but as you'll see, there's a couple little tweaks that I put on it. So let's move on and actually take a look at the PowerApp now that I've built to demonstrate this. If I go back to PowerApps here, we can see in the PowerApps website that I have already created an app, and I'm using the Book of the Room PowerApps sample template. It's a nice template. It works really good, and it's a real-world template with a real-world design that I thought would be one that I could demonstrate how to localize a PowerApp with pretty quickly. So I'm going to open up this PowerApp now. And just click it and open it here and load it up and show you how my demo PowerApp works. Now, the first thing you're going to see is that it did detect my locale, ENUS, but I have not applied any of the language settings to the PowerApp. You'll notice my buttons don't have labels, there's no text up here, nor is there any text right here where there should be. The way that the PowerApp works is that it detects the language based on a function call that we make, and then you would actually make that PowerApp respond to the language that it detected and then render the text. To make my web browser respond to all the different languages, I would need to go into settings and change it from language to language throughout the video, and I think that could get pretty confusing. So I'm going to show you how you detect the language that the PowerApp runs in, but for demonstration purposes in this app, I have a little toggle I put in down here that allows me to select which language and pretend this is the value that was detected. And then everything in my app is going to key off this GBL language global variable that I set when I select an item here. So let's take it for a spin. So if I pick ENUS, you can see all the text for ENUS displays, and I have set that context variable to that value. If I select ES for Spanish, you can see I've translated the page into Spanish here as well. Again, the global variable is updated whenever I select this drop-down. I can also pick Chinese here and translate it into Chinese. And then I have another feature inside of the app. If I have not provided translations for strings for a certain language code, let's take French here, for instance, I'm going to actually fall back to what I'm calling the default language of the app. And in this case, I've set that to be the ENUS or US English language. So now that we see how the PowerApp works, let's dive into it and actually see how we can build this. All right, first things first, how do you detect which language a PowerApp is currently running in? The way that you do that is very simple. You'll notice in my onVisible property right here for the first landing screen in the Book of Room PowerApp sample template, I've added this code. You can see that there's some additional code here inside. This came with the app actually, but I added the code up here. And you can see what it does. I'm basically setting a variable that holds the value for the current locale. To do that, all I have to do is execute this language function. In this case, I'm converting it all to lowercase, and then I am setting the GBL language from function global variable equal to the lowercase version of what was returned from the language function. Then to use it, that's where I use it here in the label when I say locale detected equals GBL language from function. So that's when this Power App loaded and we came back to the screen. We saw that the language was outputted here, and I know which one that I am running in at runtime. Now, as I mentioned, it's really hard to do a demo where I flip my web browser from one locale to another, or even my Windows settings to make that happen so that PowerApps detects a different locale in that language function call. So I've created this drop-down list right here. And the drop-down list, as you can see, in the items collection, it just has the values that you see when I open it up. And inside of there, whenever it changes, we're going to run this code. And this code right here looks like this. I'm setting that GBL language global variable. This is the global variable that I'm outputting down here in the corner to show which one I've currently selected. Then what I'm going to use is a combination of the lookup and the coalesce functions. The lookup function is going to look in a collection I have called all strings. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then it is going to say, in the all strings collection, if the currently selected value in my language drop-down list down here is equal to the language value coming out of my all strings collection, then I want to return it. Then I'm going to use the coalesce function right here. And the coalesce function basically allows me to see if I found nothing in a result set, and if so, return a different value. So as you can see in the IntelliSense here, the first argument in the coalesce collection is the argument to be returned if it's the first non-blank argument. And that means that as long as this lookup here returns a value, I'm going to return that value. Otherwise, I'm going to do that fallback that I demonstrated in the early part of the video. If no translations are available for the current language in this all strings collection, then I'm just going to default back to ENUS here. Overall, what I'm doing here is I'm setting this global variable to what's returned from that coalesce function. So that's how you can return the actual language that you're looking at, and making sure it's represented inside of your collection where you store all your translated values, and if not, fall back to the language you know you support. If we didn't do that, then and we dropped the coalesce function, then it would just return nothing and everything in the Power App would be blank. So we don't want that to happen. So let's take a look at that all strings collection before I show you how I take the values out of it and actually apply them to labels in the user interface. The first thing I did was create this Excel document. And in the document, I have a whole bunch of different worksheets here that illustrate 3 different approaches to how you can architect this particular data store, in turn the collections in PowerApps that will hold your localized strings. So this is the first way to go about it. Basically here I have all strings for every single control I want to localize in the app by which language I'd like to localize them. So I have this one called landing screen header text in ENUS, ZHCN, and ES. And here are their translated values. Now, pardon me if these translations aren't perfect. I used Google's website to just paste in the English version and then get the translated version back. The second approach you can take is saying that, okay, instead of storing them all in a single sheet, I am actually going to add another column that says which screen that this particular item is associated with. And a reason you might want to do that is because you'll notice I have this reset text value that I want to be able to localize, and it sits on 2 different screens. You can see one's called adjust time screen and the other one is date adjust screen in my app. If I come back to the Power App here, you can see these 2 screens down here. And the values that I'm going to localize here is this reset text right there, and also the reset text right here. So there's nothing stopping me from taking the approach where I would like to do this all in one spot. But here you can see that I have to call these controls out differently. I have the adjust time screen reset text and the date adjust screen reset text values to hold them. So it can get a little bit confusing, and it causes me to rename the key to get at this value each time. I think over time that can get pretty cumbersome in a PowerApp. So that's why I came up with this approach. Here I call it the same thing no matter what screen it's in, and then I just tie it to screen. Well, there's a third approach that you can come up with as well that I think is even better for large PowerApps. And that is splitting your collections by screen. And so here I have all of the strings for my landing screen. I have all the strings for my adjust time screen. And I also have all the strings for my date adjust screen. So I've separated them out. There's no right answer. You can do this any way you want. I'm just showing 3 different ways on how you can organize this data, and talked a little bit about the benefits you might see by taking one approach versus another in the PowerApp. So after you have the data here, if you choose to use Excel for this data source, to get it into your PowerApp, it's pretty easy to do. What you'll want to do is come back to your PowerApp, go to View, Data Sources, and in my data sources you can see that I've already imported all of those different tables of data from Excel. Now, if you're going to import it from Excel, there's something important to keep in mind. You have to format these things as a table, and you have to give them a name up here so that the PowerApp name of that collection that you're working with will be the same name that you apply to the table here. So you can see here, this one is called all strings. Then I have all strings by screen, so on and so forth. After you have the data in Excel, if this is where you choose to store that data, then you can go back to the PowerApp, click Add Data Source, pick Import from Excel, select your Excel file, and after you've done that, it's going to go through and show you all the data tables. You just select one and hit Connect, and then it's added. You can select all of them if you like. I've already added all these to my app, so I'm not actually going to select any, but I'll just hit Cancel here. And again, if we look at our data sources, you can see I've already imported them. It's important to keep in mind that you don't have to do it this way to create these collections that hold the data. It's very handy though, because you can hand off the Excel sheet to a localization company and have them localize it for you. Sorry about that. I had the phone on mute, but you can't mute your phone to prevent it from doing emergency alerts. It's been raining a lot where I live today, so that was a flash flood watch. Luckily, I'm not floating away yet. So as I mentioned, that you can do these things inside of Excel, but you could also store this data inside of CDS or locations such as SQL Server, SharePoint list, whatever you want for the data source is fine. But one big advantage of importing them into the app here is this data is available in offline mode then, because it's always inside of the app. One consideration to make is if you have an extremely large amount of this data, it could take longer for your app to load the first time it's downloaded into the PowerApps player, because the data obviously takes up more room inside of the app itself. Okay, so that talks about how we have pulled the data in here. And now I can move on and look at the collections here. And you'll notice inside of the collections, those items that we looked at those data connections here, they're not actually represented back here inside of my collections. And so they are still here though. And the way that you get at them programmatically is just to reference them by the exact same name you see here. So keep in mind as you go back and think about it from that Excel point of view, like I pointed out, the name you give these tables right back here is the same exact name that they appear as a data source. In turn, it becomes the same name you reference them programmatically. So think about them and give them a name that makes sense before you add them to your app. All right, so now that we've seen how we load the data in, how we're localizing that data inside of Excel in this case, other options you may have, how do I actually use the language variable that I've created here, GBL language, so that I can actually change the text at runtime. So let's just take a look at this one in the very top, for example. It says book a room. And we know that we have, back in our all strings collection, here's book a room in English. We're using the key called landing screen header text for ENUS. I'm using that same key also for Chinese and Spanish, and here are their translations. So as I come back to the Power App and we take a look at this code here, the code that I'm actually going to use, I have all three approaches that I discussed here before inside of my Power App. I'm going to uncomment approach 1, and I'm going to comment out the third approach, and then I'll come back to it here in a second. So our first approach works like this. I'm basically saying that the text value of this label that displays the book a room text in English, I'm going to look up from that all strings collection. Remember, that's that one over here, imported from Excel, that correlates to this sheet inside of Excel in this table. So what I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to do a lookup into that collection. My condition is where the key is equal to landing screen header text and the language is equal to that global context variable. Now remember, I'm setting this global context variable here so I don't have to switch my browser's language settings over and over during the course of this demo. You would key off of the same thing that created the global language function right here, the call to the language. So that's what you would key off of instead of how I'm doing it for this demo. So that's that value there. And so this is my condition, and then this is the value that I'm going to return. Value is actually the name of the column that I had back here. You can name these columns anything you want. I just went off what was in the blog post and changed them a little bit for how I like it. So that's approach 1, and here I'm looking up against the all strings piece. And then I also have the tooltip here. You can see the tooltip, I set it to the exact same code. So when I play this app and I mouse over that area, now we can see my tooltip is book a room. That's important, especially for accessibility purposes. You'll want to make sure that your tooltips are populated with values and also translated appropriately so things like screen readers can read them to folks who cannot see them. I've also taken this exact same approach for the code up here, and I just set it up for the text value of my different buttons on the screen too. So here we can see I have a button. I'm looking up the exact same way I did before, but here I'm looking for the key called Book for Existing Meeting button. So if I come down back here into Excel, here you can see that Book for an Existing Meeting button value right there. So on and so forth. I did it for the OR text right here. I also did it for the Book Without a Meeting button as well. and I did it for all their tooltips too. So that's basically what I talked about is approach 1, and that's using that collection called all strings. Now let's head back up here to the top and let's look at a different approach we can take. All right, I changed the commenting here so that we now have approach 2 live. And in approach 2, all strings for all screens are still in the single Excel worksheet, or the collection as we see it. In this case, they're all strings by screen. But this is the one where I added the column that indicates which screen we're looking at. If we come back to Excel and take a look at it, here you can see that column I created called screen. And now you can see that my keys are more abstract, and I can reuse them more easily across the Power App when I'm having that same text being localized in more than one spot. To get at the data in this approach, it's the same thing. I'm just going after the different collection, but I'm adding this particular condition here where screen equals landing screen, because I'm on the landing screen. The key is header text, and the language is the value of the language I detected. All right, that brings us to our third approach. So I've commented out approach 2, and now I have approach 3 coded up here. This one is using one Excel worksheet, or what becomes the collection inside of the Power App when I import it. One collection being used to store the string for each screen in the app. So coming back here again, here's the screen in the collection for landing screen settings, adjust time screen settings, adjust date adjust screen settings. So now, if we take a look at this code here, we can see that the landing screen strings, that's the table of data that has my localized strings for this landing screen I'm currently on. I pass in the key of header text and the language that I want to get out of it. Now this one I can also showcase on some other screens throughout the app here too. So if we take a look at the adjust time screen, check out the reset button up here. This one is pulling from the adjust time screen settings. That's this one back here. As you can see, all I have is one value I've localized so far on this one. And I also have the date adjust where I localize the same value, because if we look at the date adjust screen, we will see we also have that same thing up here in the top right. And here I'm referencing the collection that corresponds to this screen, where my key reset text is the exact same on the date adjust screen, and it's the exact same one here on the adjust time screen. So those are 3 different approaches, like I talked about before, that you can use to do this. So let's take a look at how that is actually happening in practice now. And I'll flip this over to Spanish. And then we see everything localized in Spanish there. Back to the adjust time screen. Oh, look, it doesn't fit. I left this one like this on purpose because I wanted to point out different languages, different words, different lengths. Sometimes you'll find out as you localize, your original app design may not accommodate what you originally had set out to do. So you might need to make it a little wider like that. And if I go over to the date adjust screen, we've got the same thing going on there as well. So now I can make those wider. And now it fits, and I see it in Spanish. If I head back here again, and then I can pick Chinese, now I can go to those other pages in the app, and I can see that they're fitting very nicely on that screen and that screen. So just one final check to do if I was really going to roll this out would be the other language that I have, Spanish. And now we can come back to those screens. Oh yeah, I already looked at that one. And those fit good too. So that is a little demo of how you can go about localizing things inside of PowerApps. I hope it comes in handy for you as you architect and roll out and develop PowerApps in multilingual scenarios for whoever you're developing them for. Thanks a lot for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel. I've always got new videos coming. And if you subscribe, it'll really help you out so that anytime I publish a new video, you'll find out about it. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you next time.